Museum Digit
2020.
A Magyar Nemzeti Múzeum online
virtuális konferenciája.
Hello, my name's Nick Merriman. I'm the Chief Executive of the Horniman Museum and Gardens in South London in the UK. And I want to talk to you about actively engaging the public in the climate and ecological crisis work at the Horniman Museum. Just to give you a little bit of background on the Horniman, I'm just going to show you some slides now, which will give you a sense of the context in which we're working. I'm just going to share my screen now. Bear with me. Okay. Here's the title of my talk, Actively Engaging the Public in the Climate and Ecological Crisis. And here's a few slides to show you what the Horniman looks like. It's, as you can see, on the building on the right dates from 1901, so we're well over 100 years old, with various modern extensions. We have collections of human cultures and natural history from all around the world. Our founder was a tea merchant who lived locally, and he used his wealth to bring the world to Forest Hill, which is the part of London in which we work. So we have anthropology or world cultures collections. We have extensive natural history collections from all around the world. And we have, as a subset of anthropology, one of the world's best collections of musical instruments. But we're not just a museum, we also have an aquarium, which I'll speak a little bit more about in a moment. And we have 16 acres of gardens and various facilities such as a bandstand and a nature trail, which is quite long. And we have rather magnificent views into central London. You can possibly see the central London business district there. Is something showing our gardens. And we're very much a family orientated museum. I'll stop sharing my screen now. The museum has nearly 1 million visitors to its site each year, and it's government funded. It's a nationally funded museum, but in a local community. So unlike the Central London Museum, such as the British Museum, nearly all of our visitors, 75% of our visitors, come from the local area. And what's also unusual is that they come again and again and again over generations. And it's quite common for me to meet a family who'd say, we come every week, we come 50 times a year. So we have a very loyal audience. And of course, it's an audience that we can develop a long-term relationship with. They're not tourists who only come once. So this was the context into which I came as a new chief executive 2.5 years ago. And the great thing about coming into a new job is that you can look at the institution with fresh eyes and maybe see things and ask questions that other people who've been there for a long time haven't asked. My predecessor as chief executive had been in the role for about 25 years, and she'd been really, really successful. She developed a sustainable financial model about 8 years before my arrival. She'd introduced charges to some elements of our offer. So there's a charge to enter the aquarium. We also have a butterfly house developed a few years ago in the grounds. There's a charge for that. And we have a family-friendly exhibition each year for about 6 months, which also has a charge for it. And that's a commercial exhibition that's brought in from commercial providers. And because of our local audience, repeat visitors, that model means that we sell lots of memberships, particularly family memberships, which means they can come as many times as they like in a year. And prior to COVID, we had 8,600 family memberships, totaling about 35,000 people. And that itself was a big source of income. And over the period of introducing charges, amazingly, admission numbers went up as well, from about 650,000 to nearly 1 million, as I say. So they achieved a remarkable feat of introducing charges and increasing admission by becoming more visitor orientated and market focused. But interestingly, the growth in numbers was amongst a very middle class, largely white audience. The local area, Forest Hill, had become gentrified as it had affordable family houses. So the local area was less diverse, and that meant, with the focus on middle-class families, that the audience for the museum was also much less diverse. So 40 years ago, the museum had 40% of its visitors were from local ethnic minority communities. Now it's gone down to only 18%. So the audience is larger, but less diverse than it used to be. So when I came in, I identified that as a problem, because the museum is supposed to be for everybody, and it receives public funding to be for everybody. So that's a challenge. Also, it became really clear when I came in that people couldn't really say what the Horniman was for, what its mission is. They would typically say, it's a list of things, like the things I've said earlier: anthropology, natural history, musical instruments, aquarium, gardens, etc., etc. They couldn't say what the overall purpose of those facilities was for. The mission had actually been developed in the 1980s, and it was essentially about using the collections to promote an appreciation of world cultures and natural environments. It seemed to me that, given all the pressures in the world, issues like climate change and biodiversity loss, migration, social unrest, promoting an appreciation was too weak. So one of my first tasks was to gather all of the staff together in a series of workshops and external stakeholders to really begin to interrogate what the Horniman is, what its mission should be, and particularly how it's distinctive from all the other many museums in London. And we soon realized, although really nobody had articulated this before, we soon realized that the Horniman is the only museum in London where you can see nature and culture side by side at a global level. So that immediately, of course, put us in a really interesting position in beginning to look at the interaction between people and the environment. Otherwise, in London, the great majority of museums are about history and culture, humanity, and we have one major natural history museum. We look at the combined, the interaction. We also realized through research that because of our mainly family audience, the parents, grandparents, relatives bringing usually very small children to visit were actually very worried about the future that these small children would be growing into as adults, as we did or didn't meet our carbon reduction targets, for example. But we realized they often felt completely overwhelmed when faced with, the melting of the ice caps, the fires in Australia or the United States, deserts, mass migration, and so on. And they kind of rather felt, well, I recycle, I try to be ethical, but what can I do in the face of all these challenges? So there was a real appetite for engagement to actually do something about some of these important global issues. So after some reflection, we developed a new, much more active mission for the Horniman, which I'll read out now and then show on a slide a bit later. The new mission is: the Horniman connects us all with global cultures and the natural environment, encouraging us to shape a positive future for the world we all share. So you can see it's about that global interaction between people and environment. It's about working together. Importantly, it's about a positive future in the face of all these negative and difficult things, and it's about sharing. So you can imagine that in the light of all of that, we realized that tackling actively the climate and ecological crisis becomes an absolutely major part of the Horniman's mission, including looking at the interaction between environmental and social justice. So in terms of timescale, we developed the new mission 2 years ago now. We declared a climate and ecological emergency in July 2019, as a number of cultural organisations in the UK were doing. But we felt, as many have, that words are fine, words are quite easy. What really counts is actions. So we developed a climate and ecological manifesto, which we launched in January 2020. Seems a long time ago, pre-COVID, but it's not that long ago. And importantly, that was not just a declaration of words, it was commitment to undertake a series of actions. So the manifesto has a series of declarations around change and targets, and it's backed up by a more detailed action plan. And essentially, we said the Horniman would work in 2 main areas. First of all, is to get our own house in order as a museum and gardens. So committing ourselves, for example, to be greenhouse gas neutral by 2040, to recycle 97% of our waste and water. It's a small percentage we can't recycle ourselves. You can see the detail of our manifesto online on our website if you're interested. And the second thing, which I want to spend the rest of this talk on, was engaging and activating the public in making positive changes in their own lives. We call it contributing towards a positive movement for environmental change. And why is this important? Why should museums like the Horniman, and I would say all museums, do this? Why should they begin to really activate their citizens in change? The first reason is, to my mind, that museums are unusual in that they are institutions of the long term. In the Horniman, we have collections, geological collections going back to the formation of the Earth, and evidence for the 5 other mass extinctions in the Earth's history. And we're now, of course, living in the 6th mass extinction, which we call the Anthropocene. And museums' mission is to look after its collections for posterity, whatever that means, but they are orientated towards future generations, drawing on collections from the past and acting in the present. So unlike most areas of life, politics, economics, etc., which is locked into short-term thinking, museums, it's the role of museums to think long-term. So to my thinking, given that the science on climate change and ecological crisis is indisputable, museums have a moral and ethical duty to speak out with this long-term perspective about the existential threat that is there for all of society, not just museums. And the other reason is that museums have the public trust still. Museums are amongst some of the few public institutions still to have the trust of the public, or speaking the approximation to the truth, in other words, evidence-based and balanced narratives. And crucially, museums also have mass reach. In the UK, pre-COVID, there were 80 million visits to museums each year. which is more than all the people who attend football matches and more than all of the people who go to church. So museums are really important bodies in getting out a message that is so important. So I'm just going to say a little bit about some of the things that we've been doing in the Horniman, and I hope they'll be of interest. I'm going to show some slides again and share my screen. So here's the new mission, which I read out earlier. I mentioned that we've got an aquarium, and it is the first place in the world to successfully breed coral in captivity, which means rather than coral breeding in the wild one time a year for a couple of days, which is very precarious, we've got it breeding 6 times a year. So we can accelerate evolution, and we're working with other aquaria to try to selectively breed coral that is more tolerant of warmer waters, with the aim of repopulating coral reefs in the future. So the oceans and ocean health is really important. And we've had a particular push on plastic pollution in the marine environment. So last year, we did a major intervention for 2 months called Beat Plastic Pollution, where we removed many of the fish and other specimens in our aquarium, put them safely in the back, and replaced them with plastic rubbish. And you can see that here, perhaps. And people found it really shocking because they expect museums to present rather nice, lovely displays. And the sort of emotional impact this had was summarized by one story of a young child who went with her mother, who was upset enough about this display, go back home and write a 20-page booklet about the danger of plastic pollution that she sent to her local member of parliament, who we know from the Horniman. And here's another example. We have a jellyfish tank, which is rather beautiful, which has jellyfish rotating around slowly. We took the jellyfish out and replaced them with plastic bags. Again, very shocking. Also long-term, we have a turtle here. The interpretation draws attention to the danger of plastic pollution for turtle health, for example. We've also worked with a number of artists looking at environmental issues. This is one that's just finished, an artist called Claire Morgan, who makes artworks out of bits of plastic she finds on the seashore and in the ocean. And here she's got some rather startling taxidermy, stuffed animals that are found in the Horniman's grounds, spewing out bits of plastic, rather unpleasant and shocking. And we feel that this emotional response is one of the most important things that we can use to prompt action in people. Also, like many others, we've done a series of exhibitions. This was one of our more recent one, a series of artist photographs of melting glaciers from around the world called Meltdown. And we introduce a climate or ecological component in all of our exhibitions now. So our next exhibition is a family exhibition on monkeys, which will include a whole section about destruction of primate habitats, an important message. Another thing we really want to do, so this is about informing, engaging in the emotions and priming people for action. But then how do we support people to do action? One way in which we're doing this is by developing what we're calling our Environmental Champions Club. The aim is to recruit, mainly from our membership, in the first instance, 500 families who will work with a dedicated member of staff, Environment and Ecology Action Officer. They will commit to living more sustainably. We will give them tools in which they can help themselves do this by reducing waste, reducing greenhouse gas, reducing travel, etc., eating better and more sustainably. We'll work with them to do benchmarking so that they can track their progress. We'll give them rewards and badges, particularly for the children, and we hope this will be driven by the children, actually. We'll provide them inspiring content through dedicated online lectures from celebrities and so on who are endorsing the work. And crucially, it won't be only about them taking actions themselves to live more sustainably. We'll be encouraging them to be active citizens. In other words, vote accordingly, lobby corporations, lobby politicians, write letters, activate wherever they can. It's their choice as to how actively they are engaged. And the museum is not a political organization, but we are saying ethically and morally and based on the science, change needs to accelerate. And we support people to be actively engaged in these issues. We're also actively engaged in monitoring air pollution in our local roads, which is a big health problem. And we provide a home for the London Environmental Education Group to give them a base. So briefly, as my time is running out, our next steps, we're waiting for funding for a major project called Nature and Love, which will transform our natural history gallery, transform the interpretation in our outside spaces, open up greater access to our nature trail. It's called Nature and Love because we realize through research studies that one of the ways of overcoming people's feeling of being overwhelmed in the face of global issues is to focus on their love of family, the next generation, and our own family focus. If you can get people to activate themselves by thinking about their own individual young family or their young relatives, then that's a real motor for change. So to finish off, I hope that's been some useful examples of how one museum is practically getting its own house in order and actively engaging its audiences as citizens. The UK is hosting the delayed COP26 climate change conference in November next year. We really think there's a major push that museums, both in the UK and internationally, need to do to shout out about the urgency of accelerating change before it's too late. Thank you very much.